Sir, we can see your screen, but your voice is not audible.
Is it audible now?
Yes, yes, it's audible.
Alright, so today we'll be continuing with what we left with last time. So last time we were with Azure virtual networking. So you guys might be familiar with networking or might not be, but you have been using networking since your childhood. Like whatever mobile phone you're using to connect to things, that is basically networking. So without networking, you won't be able to connect to other devices and connect to the internet. So similarly, there is networking in Azure, but it is a little different because this is virtualized. Normally, what we do is we connect Ethernet cables and different cables. There, for example, there is a fiber optic cable, and there's a Ethernet cable called as a Cat5 cable, Cat6 cable. So similarly, there are different types of cables that are connected to each other through which we are doing this inter exchange of information. So within Azure, what this is, how this is done is basically, there's a firewall which obstructs everything, and based on your requirements, things are opened. So that is what a software-defined network is. Basically, everything is connected to each other, and all access is there. But via software, that access is blocked. And based on your requirement, whatever your requirement is, that particular paths are open so that you can communicate. So that is basically how virtual networking works. Now there is virtual networking on Azure. Then how you create virtual networks. Basically, if you guys do you guys know about IP addresses? Like what is the range of IP addresses? How what is IPv4? What is IPv6? If you guys might are from your first year, then you might not know about these things. But anyone in their second or third year, and obviously the fourth year people would know about these things. So basically, there is a whole IP address range, and we divide them we divide them based on classes, and there are two types of divisions between this. One is a classless. Uh, One is classless network. You say segmentation, and there is a class-based, a class-full network segmentation. So for the class-full, it is basically divided into five classes: class A, B, C, and D. So when we say about class-full, so see, basically we have these four octets. Octets basically means there are four 8-bit numbers. So what is the range of 8-bit numbers? 0 to 255, right? Because 2 raised to 8 is 256. So there are these four 8-bit numbers, and they are divided into different classes. This is class full segmentation of IP addresses. Similarly, there's a class less segmentation of IP addresses. When we are going into enterprise domain, so there these class less type of segmentation is used because it is more efficient. If you use class full type of segmentation to create your networks, so basically you will be using a large range of things. So see, from class A, this starts from 0.0.0.0 to 127.255.255.255. This is basically a whole lot, a very big range that is allotted to someone to do something. So that is why we use class less type of segmentation. So I won't go into the exact detail how we do classless segmentation, but whenever you see a IP range like this, for example, there is this IP range such as say 10.10 uh, 0 dot 0 slash say 26. So when you see this slash and behind the slash are two or one number, basically up to 32. So you'll never see 32 there, but basically up till 31. So if there's a slash and there are two numbers behind, think of that as classless segmentation. So that is what we also use in Azure. So when we're creating rules for Azure for networking, like allow this IP to do and this port on this IP. So at that time we need to provide a certain IP address and a certain IP address range so that we can create that virtual network within Azure. So basically, what are the key network capabilities of a virtual network within Azure? First is the segmentation and isolation. As I said, that segmentation within Azure is a classless type of segmentation. So basically, you can define custom ranges of these IP addresses. So for example, these all things, these segmentations actually happen in the power of two. So if you want to take the least amount of IP address, you should at least have a smallest lot of 8 will be provided to you, because these are 8-bit numbers of which we are talking about. So based on whatever your requirement is, for example, if you want say 10 IP addresses, then you'll have to take 16 IP addresses and 5 will be wasted. But if you go for classful, then even more will be wasted. And that is why this segmentation technique of classless addressing is very helpful, and we use it in Azure. Then again is isolation. Whatever virtual network I am creating, whatever virtual network I am creating and using, so that particular network will be isolated from a new network that I'll be creating or accessing. So there is this isolation. For example, I create a virtual network A, I create a virtual network B. Even if those IP addresses match with, first of all, when you are trying to create an IP address range for a virtual network, when you're trying to create a range for a virtual network, at that time you cannot overlap it with another new network. For example, I have created an IP address with a particular range, and I want to create a new, I'm sorry, I have you have created a virtual network with a particular range, and now you want to create a new virtual network, and you're trying to input the same range. So that won't be possible, because then you want to overlap that, but that is not possible. So Azure won't let you create that. So whatever addresses, whatever virtual networks you're creating, obviously they will be different from each other, and by default they are isolated from each other, unless you allow a rule to communicate for the both of those virtual nets to communicate with each other. They will not have any sort of a connection with each other. Then another is internet communication. So basically, as I said, it is isolated by default. Another thing is that you can uh, open one port, a certain IP address range port, that is a private IP of a machine. Say for example, you have a virtual network, and virtual network. So I think, do you guys grasp this proper term of virtual network? What is a network in your idea? What do you think of what a network is? Can you please say, so that I can at least get a gist of what you guys are thinking? If you don't want to say it on mic, you can also drop it in the chat. In terms of network, what do you think a network is within computer networks? Come on, I won't kill you if you tell a wrong answer. Like anything, what do you think of it? Basically, even if you tell wrong, then I should take things from a more basic level. If I am confident that you guys know what networking, the basic of networking is, then I can go forward easily. I'm audible, right? Hello, hello, hello. Yeah, I know. All right, I am audible, but I just want to know what you guys think of the term network. What does it mean in terms of computer networks? Anything that comes to your mind. It is okay if you give a wrong answer. At least I should know that what you guys are thinking. Hello. All right. Since no one is answering, then I'll just continue with this. So, internet communication. Similarly, when you have a network, and for example, network is basically a connection of devices which can talk to each other. A connection of different PCs, for example, or different smart devices, say a phone or a laptop or a desktop, anything. A smart device with an NIC card. We do networking with the help of an NIC card. Network interface card is the full form of the NIC. So basically, that is where our Ethernet goes. There's an Ethernet slot, and that Ethernet slot is connected to the NIC card within our PC. Also, there is a Wi-Fi adapter. We connect through Wi-Fi, and that Wi-Fi adapter communicates to our router. It does through using radio waves, also called as might be radio waves or microwaves. The different types of waves have different frequencies, etc., etc. But just to keep it simple, even your Wi-Fi is there on that NIC card. Your Wi-Fi adapter is there on that NIC card, using which you're connecting to things and communicating with other PCs on that same network. So, for example, what I'm telling here about internet communication is that you have a private network. When you connect to your Wi-Fi, if you know the standard range of IP address that you get is that particularly 192.168.0 dot something or dot 1 dot something. So that particular range of 192.168 dot anything can be 255 anything 012. So basically that whole range, that is a private address range. This range is not allotted to anyone within the whole world, and you can use that for your own private use. The other devices out in the world will not send anything to that. When they see that particular range, they will try to see that if this is if there is this particular PC inside my own private network. If there is, then it will send it, otherwise it will say that this device does not exist. So similarly, when I have my Wi-Fi and I have, for example, my computer and I have my phone connected to it, so then my router's address is, for example, 192.168.0.1. Why one? As in because one is assigned to the uh, administrator, or the DHCP server. DHCP is basically dynamic host configuration protocol, which gives the IP address to the devices connecting to it. That is called as a DHCP server. So our router is by default a DHCP server. So I won't go into more details, but basically there is this a network of devices communicating with each other, and within that network there may be one PC which has two devices, two addresses. One is the address which can communicate to the outside world, and one is the address which communicates to the inside world. Similarly, when you take our router into picture, then our router can communicate with our internet provider, as well as it can communicate with all the devices it has given IP address to. So when we are communicating to the internet, we are communicating we are communicating through that router. So whatever is the the public IP address of the router. So the IP address of the router, which is used to uh, connect to the communicate to the our internet service provider. So that particular IP address is what our packets or requests go through. Use that particular address to communicate to our internet service provider, and from there it goes to different routing tables and other devices, and finally to our destination of whatever, for example, google.com, microsoft.com. So similarly, there is this public and private IP. So within Azure, you can have a virtual machine inside a virtual network, and it can have a public and private IP. The private IP will help you communicate within that network, and the public IP will help you communicate with the internet. That is how you can ask things from the internet and provide them to resources within your virtual network. Then there is communicate between Azure resources. As I said, there's a private network, and there are different devices which can communicate with each other using those private IP addresses. So those are done. That is communication between Azure resources. You can create two virtual machines and they can talk between each other. You can have other services such as a website, and that website can call your virtual machine, as well as it can also call other services from the internet. So similarly, there is a particular thing called as service endpoints. So when you connect to a website, that is also called as an endpoint. Endpoint means basically a URL, a link. So there are service endpoints. We make API calls so that we get some data from some particular website which we can use in our applications. So similarly, that can be done in virtual networks also. Some particular IP address and port can be opened with a particular argument. Say for example, a GET request on a particular website's uh, such and such file server. For example, when you see that there is when we make a call to a website, for example, I write in google.com. So there is a particular server which is replying to me, as in it is google.com. So similarly, when other websites are called, there are different a hierarchy of files, a file folder management in that inside that. Basically, if you have ever hosted a website, there is a first page that is called the index.html. Then again, there are different folders within different having different files which you can route to, and there is also data and other images in that. So similarly, service endpoints are nothing but those links which you can communicate to using your virtual networks again. Then communicate with on-premise resources. So how this is done is basically a connection from Azure is made to your own private data center. So these are again of different types. One is point to site. Point to site, you can see this image here on the right side of what a point to site connection is. In this case, this is a VPN. This is also a connection which A point means a particular workstation or PC or server, and site may come as a company. So in this case, this is a user workstation connecting to Azure. So that comes to as a point to site communication. So basically, your on-premise resources can talk to Azure resources, which will make it easy for you to integrate applications. As we explained, the hybrid cloud computing theory, like you follow a hybrid model, you keep some apps in your own private data center and some apps on your on a public cloud, that is Microsoft Azure. So in such a case, you can use this point to site or site to site communication approach, which can help you integrate your apps better. Then there is the site to site communication. Basically, there is the whole site, basically your own company, and there is a tunnel provided to you, basically a virtual private network provided to using which you can communicate to your resources in Azure. And then there is the last thing that is called as Azure Express Route. So what Azure Express Route is, that it is a dedicated private connection to Azure. So when I talk about a dedicated private connection to Azure, there are fiber optic cables. There are fiber optic cables which are connected from your company to Azure, and based on whatever bandwidth that you require, that many cables are connected. So that is the most safest and fastest way of communication to Azure from your own company. So in such cases, when the data is critical or things are more security oriented, in such cases this Azure Express route can be used. Then another forms of virtual networking is uh, root network traffic. So basically, you can assign a custom route tables. When we are talking about networking, there are different tables in different. For example, say there is me, my home with a router. Then there is my internet service provider, and there is a bigger internet service provider. So these three. So basically, just think of three routers. So when I have to for my at my home, there is, say for example, my phone and my laptop, and somehow or the other my laptop wants to communicate with, say, google.com. It wants to search for something. I want to search for something. And so how does my laptop understand, and different devices understand that, okay, this particular device here, he wants to access that particular server named google.com, and he wants to ask something from that server. So this is done through routing tables. Routing table is the core networking concept. So what happens is, whenever networks are connected, a network routing table is created. That, for example, what will be the lowest or the fastest way to communicate these two resources. For example, say my router is connected to three other routers, then it will know that this particular router has this particular IP address, that particular router has that particular IP address, and that particular router has that particular IP address. So it knows all of these three routers IP address, and say for example these two routers are again connected to some other router. So my router will also know through that routing table that what will be the fastest route to reach the router past the next router. Oh, this things may be little confusing. I'll try to show it to you through whiteboard. So here there is my router, and this is my laptop. This is my phone. Similarly, there is one more router here. There is one more router here. just keep on creating routers, for example, just so it is easy for you to understand things. Yeah. So this is the connection of things. This is how things are connected to each other. First is my laptop and mobile. Then this is the router. Just say connected to these two routers, and these two routers are connected as in like this. So when a routing table is created, basically each router will know the fastest way to reach the other router. So say for example this is router 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So here each of these routers will know that how do I reach the other router the fastest. So when a request is sent from my laptop, it will head towards to my router. And say for example this is google.com. This is google.com. Basically as Google server which will return my request. So now my router knows that okay, uh, my seeing its own routing table, it will know that okay, that the fastest way to go to google.com would be through him. So he will send a request to this router, and this router will forward that request to Google, and again Google will reply back, coming back to my router and then back to my PC. So that is how basically routing takes place. So you can using your Azure virtual networking, you can declare custom routing tables. Like for example, you can declare that okay, this routing source is there, I do not trust this particular source, so I want that no thing should be passed through this, none of my data should pass through these things, and I only want uh, none of my data should pass through this. So only option for me would be, for example, to go through this, or for example there is another router that is connecting to things in this way. So basically I can declare custom rules that okay, I want you to go here, and from here I want you to go, for example, here, not here, and from there I want you to go here, and basically whatever route that I want to take, I can declare that. Custom route can be declared within Microsoft Azure. And then there is this border gateway protocol, which is one of the means of how internet communication works nowadays. So basically there are big networks. There are big networks. For example, there is this big network, there is this big network, and there is some communication that has to be done these these two big networks. So these communications can be done using a protocol called as border gateway protocol. So particularly a scenario like this is called as EBGP protocol, external border gateway protocol. So there will be a router here, not router, a node here and a node here, which can communicate to each other and then again to internal networks, and that particular thing is called as IBGP, internal border gateway protocol. These particular rules for BGP protocol can also be declared using route network traffic within Azure virtual networking. Then you can filter network traffic using network security groups and Azure network virtual interface, uh, virtual appearance basically. So what you can do is you declare certain firewall rules and wide access network optimization rules. Now, do you guys know what is PAN, WAN, MAN, LAN? And you might have heard of these things. Like you have your router at home and that says WLAN, wireless local area network. Then there is WAN, that is wide area network. Then there is PAN, personal area network. MAN, metropolitan area network. So there are different types of networks, and you can optimize those according to your needs, and you can declare certain firewall rules that this particular set of IP addresses with these particular ports should be allowed, and the rest should not be allowed, or vice versa. Basically, whatever is to your requirement. Then there is connecting different virtual networks. As I said, by default, virtual networks cannot communicate with each other. But using this virtual VNet peering, say for example, this is VNet 1, this is VNet 1, and this is VNet 2. So by default, these two networks are isolated from each other. So what you can do is you can create a service called as VNet peering. You can use this service, and you can create a hole within this and a hole within this, which will only communicate with each other. So this hole won't allow anything else other than things coming from this hole. That is how you can communicate between two virtual networks also using VNet peering. So coming to next thing is virtual private networks. Virtual private networks are basically encrypted networks. So all of you guys might have already, not might have already have used VPNs in some case or the other. So virtual private networks are nothing but two networks talking to each other, but their communication is encrypted. So my whenever I'm talking to something, for example, I want to talk to facebook.com, and I am doing that through a VPN service that
Um,
normally we use. Yes.
uh, Let me add something. Yeah.
Yes, please add it.
Okay. Can you come back to the slide?
Just a second.
Please? Yeah. But what I'm going to explain is to add some things about according to a pairing. So, if, for example, if you are deploying your resources in Azure, first time you will create your resource group, you need to create to your virtual network. So this virtual network, it will allow that all resources which will be in your resource group will communicate it into this virtual network. And for example, if for example we have a two resource group, for example, one for Department of Science and another for Department of IT. And all that resource group are located into Azure. So where if I want to make a communication between the Department of Science and the Department of IT, I need to create a pairing. This pairing, it will be like a channel which will communicate between these two resource group, like these two departments. And the pairing is only for resource which is located into Azure. But if you need to go outside, for example, if you have moved your workload into Azure, you can use, for example, site-to-site VPN. This is in case where you need to connect many, many resources, like many computers. But in case, for example, you have just only one computer, you can use point-to-site VPN. For example, I want to connect directly from to my servers, which are located for example, in India. And then, being in this network, it will require for me to deploy a point-to-site VPN like EKA V2. It depends on which resources which the service you want to use. And if, for example, it is for one computer to connect to Azure, you need to deploy it into your computer. And once it will be deployed directly, it will simulate like you are on this virtual network. And the deployment, it may take time. Like, for example, it can take 10 minutes, depend on your connections, because you're going to create your virtual IP. You're going to create some tools to simulate your connection and to encrypt your connection. And once it's done, then you can simulate, you can be directly in your virtual network. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you that whenever, as Pascal added, when there are two resource groups, then whatever virtual networks you are creating would be isolated from each other. And to allow them to communicate, you need to use something called as VNet peering. Then there is virtual private networks. These are nothing but two different networks which are encrypted, which talk to each other in an encrypted manner. So whatever may be the different nodes that are there within the path, so they cannot read your own the encrypted data. So basically, only you and the person you are trying to talk to have a pair of keys, that is a public and private key. They use that to encrypt your data and decrypt your data. So basically, a VPN gateway is nothing but a type of virtual network VNet gateway, which allows you to communicate to other networks. And for example, say this is a particular network, and I have two networks, A and B, and that particular part that is going to talk to each other, that can be termed as the gateway through which the requests are going out and coming in. So that is the gateway, that is what the name suggests, gate. So you cannot enter within the network through without the gate, and we cannot go out from the network throughout the gate. That is what a gateway is. So what you can use this for is you connect this to on-premises data centers. You can connect your Azure resources to your on-premise data center uh, through a site-to-site connection, as we explained before, as Pascal explained before. There's a site-to-site communication. Your own data center talking to the your whole setup in Azure. That is a site-to-site connection. Then there are individual devices. For example, there is only one PC that you want to connect to Azure to work, or send data, do anything. So that can be called a point to site communication. Since there is only one PC, it is called as a point, and your whole setup again is taken as a site in Azure. Then you connect virtual networks to other virtual networks through a network to network connection. So there is again this connection called as a network to network connection. This is different from site to site in a way, because it is kind of similar, but there is a little small criteria. Askul, do you think you can add something on this? What is the difference between a site to site connection versus a network to network connection? They're almost same, but there will be a small criteria that differs both of these things.
Oh, I think it's okay. But if I can compare, just just to have on your idea, like site to site, it's like you want to connect many computers to get access to Azure resources. This is a site. And to deploy site to site, sometimes you can use, for example, a express route. And for example, we can use another services. But what you need to know is when you are deploying a gateway, a VPN, you have to, it will generate a key, a key, and this key, it is that key you will use for example, if you use, for example, for one computer to connect to Azure, this key, it will need to authenticate that it's me who are it is me who are connecting to these resources, and this is the way to secure your connection. And that key, as you are, for example, an IT, it just only you can get access to this key, because it is must be secret. And if you want to monitor your connection, you can go into Azure, and once you have deployed a VPN, you can see how traffic in the graph is going on. Like how many data did you share within your PC and the resources which is located in Azure. And if there is a problem, you can track, maybe there is a problem with your connection, maybe there's a problem with your setting, your VPN into your computer, and all that kind of problem you can track. And Microsoft documentation allow will give you all information in case you need to deploy or in case you need to save it to solve the problems. Yeah. But for site to site, this is for a grid environment. It means like we have our servers which locate, for example, in India, but we are not in India. For example, we are in South Africa and we are working in South Africa, but our central information are located in India because maybe we deploy in India because maybe we have our reasons, maybe because it's legally approved, for example, for our society, just like this. But we are working in South Africa, and as we are many, we need to deploy a site-to-site VPN to connect to these resources. Yeah. And inside, it will be like, it will create a, a, a channel, a channel which can contain, for example, 10 computers. And inside this channel, the information will be encrypted. It doesn't need like it is one computer to be authenticated, but as it is a site to site, it will be a channel which will contain many resources. That's all.
Yeah, so to summarize, I think the basic difference between both of site to site and network to network would be site to site can be, say for example, a collection of 10 PCs or 12 PCs, whatever number of it can be a group of devices which is connecting to a different group of devices. And when you talk about network, there is a whole network that is communicating with another whole network. So a network might not only be, limited to 10 devices, it may have more. But when you're talking about site, then there is a group of devices communicating with another group of devices. That can be called a site to site connection. And a whole network, as in the whole network range talking to the whole other network range, can be taken as in a network to network communication. So again, when we think about, VPN gateway types, there are two types of VPN gateways. One is a policy based gateway, another is a route based gateway. So when we explained about, how routing takes place, so similarly here you can have things based on policy and routes. Policy as in, you can block or allow different types of IP addresses. Basically here when we say that we enter IP addresses statically. Normally, how routing takes place, things are selected by the protocol dynamically. So what the protocol thinks that is the least costliest or the fastest way to communicate to the other site is taken in consideration. But when we are talking about static, that means we provide manually which particular IP address is to be encrypted through which tunnel. So policy means basically that when an IP address, this particular IP address is communicating, then what you do is when you are encrypting things, you use, for example, there are, say for example, there are 5 tunnels. So I can assign that, okay, this particular IP address should only talk to this and this tunnel and not through the remaining three. So custom policies basically you can apply with VPN gateways, as well as routing based policies, that you can decide that which the routing protocols normally do things dynamically. You can convert that to your own custom policies, that you want this routing protocol to use this particular tunnel only in this case and use this particular tunnel in that case. Then we are talking about high availability of a virtual private net. So when we are talking about, high availability of our services, so when my service is utilizing, say, some resource from my private data center also, as well as from Azure. So for example, if my VPN goes out, then my service won't be highly available, right? Because it was also talking with my data center to take some data. So if the VPN path is destroyed in some way, then it won't be able to take that data and serve my users. So that VPN, that is the network which is there, which is talking to my data center and taking data and providing to my users, it that also needs to be highly available for my whole application, my application as a whole, to become highly available. So there are different configurations of a VPN that we can use. First is the active standby. For example, there is a standby virtual private network and there is the active virtual private network. As soon as the active one goes down, the standby takes place. The other is active. You have two virtual private networks and traffic is divided between them. Once the one of the active ones goes down, then all of the traffic goes to the other one. Then there is the express route failover. Normally, when we are talking about the fastest communication between Azure and my data center, then that can be done through express route. That is a private dedicated link, fiber optic cables from Microsoft Azure to my own data center. So if that connection somehow fails, then there should also be a virtual private network that can connect my data center to Azure again. Although that might be through the internet, but there should be something for backup. So that is then express route failover. And when we are talking about zone redundant gateways, so when we are normally gateways, uh, they are in a data center that is connected to my own data center. So when you're talking about zone redundant, then as we explained redundancy yesterday, as in we have three zones and I have my resources replicated among all those of three of those zones. So if anything happens to one zone, my service is still there in the other two zones. Hence, my service is always available to my users. So again, that gateway, if one zone goes down, the gateway is also there in another data center, which can connect again me to the global Azure network. So here is the a small picture of how virtual network is. First, you see there is my virtual network within Azure, where that cloud sign is showing. Excuse me. Then from Azure, there is a VPN gateway which we have created and which is again talking to my own data center on premise, my private data center, and that communication is happening through a tunnel. Tunnel is nothing but basically an encrypted communication, which can be called as a tunnel, and they are using the IPsec protocol for encryption. So the next thing is Azure Express route that we explained here, but we'll also we'll be taking in factor a little more about what Express route has to offer. So basically, the benefits of Azure Express route is not are it has connectivity to Microsoft services all across all regions and geopolitical regions. So basically, Azure Express route, you can I I can not just have that. For example, I have my own private data center in India. Say for example, in India's capital, New Delhi, and there is a data center in, say for example, New Delhi. So I can not only connect that uh, my own private data center to the Azure data center in New Delhi, but to any other region within the world. So basically, if I want to have a private connection, a private dedicated line to say Azure data center in London, so that is also possible. That is what is the benefit of Azure Express route. I can have it connected to anything, because what if I have the majority of my users in England? Then I want to have a private dedicated line connected to there, to that particular place, so I can have the lowest latency, so I can provide the best user experience to my customers. Then global connectivity to Microsoft services across all regions with the express route global reach. Again, that comes under what I explained just now. Then dynamic routing between your network and Microsoft via border gateway protocol, which we explained before, how border gateway protocol works, the basic of that, and dynamic routing. So basically, the protocol will take the pro- the protocol will take decisions on how fast can which particular line is faster for you. Then built-in redundancy in every peering location for high reliability. So again, redundancy is nothing but having two or more copies. So in case one goes down, then we always have another in place. So since redundancy comes in place because Azure is a a global network. So every peering location can be connected to your own express route thing. To explain this in a better way, basically there are so many data centers that you can connect to. So you can also have redundant lines connected to other locations as well and other zones as well for higher reliability. Then there is direct access to many Microsoft Cloud services. So not only there are connection to like other data centers as well, but you also have direct access to the whole Azure global network because you're connected to a data center in itself, and data center almost has will always have the global services of Azure by default in them. Then there is global connectivity again, which we explained. Dynamic routing is the same thing. Then Express Route supports four models that you can use to connect to your on-premise network to Microsoft Cloud. Excuse me. So there is the first thing called as Cloud Exchange Colocation. So colocation, can be termed as I can show you that properly with the picture in the right. So basically, there is a partner internet service provider or a different cloud company. So that is closer to your own private data center that from an as compared to an Azure data center. So you can connect to that particular company and then connect to Microsoft. That is also an option which is called as Cloud Exchange Colocation. You can use express route directly to that data center and from that data center to Azure. Then point to point Ethernet connection. You can have a connection cable laid down from a point to point connection to your resources in Azure. Any to any connection, basically any service or any server can be connected to any other server within Azure using your own. Basically, that server needs to be rented for you for a particular time, and there are some policies regarding that too. But as long as you follow the policies, you can connect anything from Azure that are your resources within your setup to your own private data center, then directly from express route sites. So again about express route, that data centers have different uh, sites laid for for express route to be used as a service. So Azure also has a different infrastructure laid out that if my customers want to use express route to the data centers, then there are direct access lines that are created by Azure which directly connect to your own data center, which we were explaining before. Then there is Azure DNS. So talking about DNS, we explained this on the first day that what DNS is. Basically, you type in google.com in your PC, and it basically goes and searches for the server which is the owner of the domain as com, and that owner knows the IP address of the site Google. So that will return the IP address of google.com, and that IP address will be then searched by you to communicate with each other. That is the basic idea of domain name services. So within Azure, how that is used and what are the benefits is what we are discussing here. First is the reliability and performance. So basically, since Azure is a global network of data centers, so whatever you're hosting on Azure is on the global Azure network of domain name servers. So you get a pre-connected network of domain name servers for you to connect to, as well as you can use custom domain names. Then there is security, that is domain name uh, can a domain name service can be accessed using different types of access roles which you can assign through Azure RBAC, that is role based access control. So different types of things can be done with the Azure domain name service, such as you can configure, you can add a new domain, then you can add an alias record, you can add a record, a 4a record. uh, Basically there are different types of records that you can add to connect to other services for your websites to utilize this domain name, whatever you are adding there. So that can be assigned through role based access control, and there is logging that how much and in what way your DNS service is being utilized. You can log and monitor that. Then there are resource logs. You can apply resource logs to this service, as in when you have created this. For example, you have a service laying down. Say for example, you are a company called contoso.com and you are providing video compression service to your users, and you are doing that through a website, and that website is now really well known within your user base. So you don't want to change the domain name, so you apply a resource log there that even by default, by mistake also, no one is able to remove that domain name from there. If someone does remove that domain name, then when we search for that query in our address bar, then uh, we cannot contact a resource, because the domain name which was registered for our IP address is now no longer existent with the domain owner. So for example, when we say that contoso.com is providing this particular service, then again the owner com has IP address saved for the for their customer named as Contoso. So if Contoso deletes, stops taking services from the com service provider, domain name service provider, then the next time when its users are searching for contoso.com, then the request will just time out, because no because com will not return an IP address to Contoso. Hence, you can apply resource logs that I don't want anyone to delete my domain name service in any way. So a resource log, what it is that it does not allow you to change and delete the resource. Again, the resource log is also based on what you want it to do. You can you can keep it from modifying things. You can also keep it from being deleted. Then the ease of use of Azure DNS is normally usually that the old fashioned way to use DNS was going to the domain provider, buying the domain, configuring the domain, then having a certificate signed from a certified from a certifying authority. So basically, whenever we go to some website, then there is this padlock here. There is this particular padlock here, which is using a certificate, which tells us that this education.github.com is actually github.com. So basically, all those things have to be done, and finally on your Linux or Windows server you finally use that domain name after getting it certified and approved by the authorities which are responsible for it. You can simply do that using the Azure portal and Azure CLI. So within one command in the command line interface, or a few clicks on Azure portal, you can set up uh, the domain name for your website or web service. Then again, customizable virtual networks. So your domain names can be in private networks, as shown in the picture in the right side. So for example, you have your own office network, and you have a public net IP, which is providing services to your customers. So there is also something called as private domain name. So what you can do here is you can set up a private domain within your private network. So only the people in the PCs in your company, which is in your private network, they can connect to that particular domain. So for example, you have created a test, no, not a test, but say for example, logging website that you come in your company, and before you have to log into your PC, you have to check in that you are using this PC and you are this individual. For example, just a scenario. So you connect to a particular website with a domain name, for example, uh, your company login.com, something like this. So whatever that domain is set, it will go to that particular IP within your private network, and again go to that website that is doing the logging and logging stuff. So you can have a private domain within your private virtual network within Azure to do things that you want. Then there are alias records. Again, you can to connect to different services. Services have different type of alias records that they want the domain name service to use. For example, when I was using my own domain name, which I got from GitHub Student Developer Pack, that is a .tech domain, rahulvision.tech. So just to configure this domain, I had to add a query, a particular alias record called as a alias record within my from my domain provider, so that the application that was going to host this website, which is Vercel, VERCEL, from where I am hosting this website. So this particular application should know that I am the actual owner of that domain. So since I created that a record with whatever thing they wanted and provided a parameter to to this Vercel app, so this Vercel app was allowed to make a request to my domain provider and get it confirmed that I'm actually the owner of this domain. So that is how this particular padlock is appeared here also, because to use that to provide that, there should be a certificate, as well as they should have some confirmation that I'm actually the owner of this domain. So the next thing is, okay, just a second. The next thing is Azure Storage Services. So we are coming to as different types of Azure storage services. So within different storage services in Azure, there are the different types of storages. One is the locally redundant storage, and there is the geo redundant storage, read access geo redundant storage. You can see the different types. I'll explain them in a bit. First is the local redundant storage. So basically, what there is only one data center in which my storage account is in. So one data center in one zone, in one region, where my account exists, my storage account exists. That is local redundant storage, which is the least type of redundant storage. So in case my storage is somehow hampered with in that particular data center, then my whole storage is gone. So within that local, you can see an image here, that local redundant storage here. So there is only one data center, and there is my storage account, which has different copies of my data within that single data center. So yes, if something happens to this particular thing here, then all of my data is gone within the local redundant storage. Then there is the geo redundant storage. A geo redundant storage is replications of storage accounts within two different regions. So there is one region, say for example US East, and there is one region, say for example India Central. So if I select India Central as the other region, so basically what will happen is my storage account will be replicated in both of those two regions. So in case something goes down wrong in one particular region, then I still have my copy in the other region. So this is the geo redundant storage, and there is the read access geo redundant storage, and you can see example of it here. First there is the primary region, and there is a secondary region. So what happens is, in the secondary region, your first of all, your primary region has three, for example, three availability zones. and within that, within each zone is your storage account with one copy of your data. So what happens in the secondary region, and since this is read access, what the secondary region just reads your data from your storage accounts in all of those zones and copies it into one data center within one particular region. So you can say of it as a zone redundant storage plus a local redundant storage in some other region. As you see, a zone redundant storage can be termed as this. A zone redundant means if one zone goes down, my data is not affected because it is redundant of the zone of a particular zone. There is one region having three zones, and if one zone goes down, I still have my copy of data within two of the other zones. A zone redundant storage will normally replicate my data across three zones within one region. So you can understand if you take this into picture, a zone redundant storage, and if you want to check that a read access geo redundant storage. So a geo redundant storage, as we explained before, was my data replication within two different regions. So this is the zone redundant region, a zone redundant storage, that is three data centers within one region. We take that aside and we add that with a secondary region, at a secondary region having one data center only, and this is the local redundant storage, as you see down here. Three copies of data within one particular region only, one particular zone only. And why it is called read access? Because the local redundant storage here is reading your data from the zone redundant storage. I get to I understand that these terms of zone redundant and read access, geo redundant and local redundant are new to you, but when I'm explaining this, even if you're able to grasp a little bit of it, and when you'll go back to this learning module and just see these diagrams for yourself, then I think you'll be able to understand and grasp what I was telling here. Then there is the geo zone redundant storage, which is again the geo redundant storage was only for two regions, but it was not for multiple zones. But when we talk about geo redundant storage, and there are two regions along with three zones in one region. Then again, read access geo zone redundant storage. So the same thing, but now in a read access manner. That there is one particular region having different zones, which will only read from the primary region. And we'll be talking about different Azure storages, but Azure storage services, but we'll be talking in a a very compressed manner because we need to complete different things and we only have half an hour remaining. So first of all, there is Azure Blob, which is a massive scalable object storage for text and binary data. So basically, whatever type of data you want to add, you can add into a blob storage.
Raul,
Yes.
um, Raul, can I add something?
Sure, sure.
Okay, can you come back to the slide, please? Yeah, things that I want to add is it's about an Azure storage account types. So first of all, to deploy the Azure storage account, you need to have a storage account. So this storage account will be responsible for managing all storage you will need to deploy into Azure. So according to a locally geo read zone, geo and read access zone redundancy. So it depend on how you are using your workloads and how you are working into your enterprise, or maybe how you are providing your services. Locally redundancy, it's especially for you can, for example, you can make a backup from your resources, your data into cloud, but it will be in locally. And geo redundant storage, this is in the case when you can make a backup of your information, but you can place into another regions. This is it kind of for if to avoid disaster, maybe a natural catastrophes, and this is a way to to protect your data. And another thing is just when you are doing your redundancy storage, you have to know that, for example, if you have free zones, and in this free zone, one zone it will only be available for you because that zone is just access for your storage your account. The two other zone is just to make a backup for information. And in case, for example, you are doing troubleshooting into your zone, then these two zones will be open to be used. Yeah. And another thing is just read access geozone redundancy. This is in the way you deploy your storage into these free zones. And this free zone will be accessible anytime, every time you want. For example, you can have where you have your, for example, let's take for example for Walmart markets, and Walmart markets have a free free markets, and these free markets allocate into different zones. And for example, a zone which is located in India, for example, and another zone is located into New Delhi, for example. And to make access and for information quickly and synchronization into this information. For example, when we adding new, for example, new products, new data, we need to have a synchronization of these informations. Then to deploy a read access geozone redundancy, for example, this is will allow a communication and synchronization of information and access information. It will back up information, and after backup, we have the ability to access this information that is backup. That's I want to add.
Yeah, thank you for your input. So yeah, about Azure Blobs, it is basically a massive scalable storage object which you can use to store text and binary data, and it also includes support for big data analysis through data lake storage generation 2. So again, these different types of storage types will also come later. Then there is the new service called as Azure Files, which is basically a uh, managed file service. You can use this to share things to basically share a file server database, privately, basically on your to your on-premise resources or towards public, based on whatever requirement you have. Then there are Azure queues, a message storing queue application. Basically, you store your messages, and how a queue works. So basically, queue is first in, first out. So things queue up for your messages. So you also use these type of queues in, uh, say for example, a microservice type of thing, where some requests are there coming in, and some other part of your application which is accepting request. You can just put a queue in between both of them. So in case one application goes down, basically one part of your application goes down, then the other will just keep sending queues into this particular Azure queue storage, which will store your queues and as soon as your different type of basically other part of your other part of your application which has gone down, as soon as it comes up, then this queue will start pushing things to the other side of that application. So basically, this part of your application which was it's better to show it in slides, so you can just visualize better. So there is this queue in between, and there is this two application, app 1, app 2. There is this queue. So app 1 is sending messages into this queue, and this queue is sending messages into this app. So say for example, if this just app one decides to go down for some reason, then just this queue keeps filling up, and since this queue is accepting messages, app 2 will not be affected in any case. And as soon as app 1 starts running again, then this queue will start again, will again start to send messages into app 1, hence not letting your app 2 to uh, go down for time, for some time. And there are Azure disks. So basically, these are block level storage volumes for Azure VMs. Disk is nothing but, say, for example, a hard disk, HDD device, or an SSD. You can call it as a disk device. So you can, create custom storage level disks. You can have it for 32 GB up till, I think that was an option for 32,000 GBs was the highest limit for Azure disks. Then the benefits of this is these are durable and highly available because of redundancy. As we talked about here, how different type of redundancies can be chosen here for your storage account types. So similarly, based on whatever thing you choose, these are will be highly available and durable because of the hardware that Azure chooses for itself. Then secure, because you can these things when in the Azure data center, you can decide for your entire disks to be, or your entire service to be encrypted or not. So you can have it an encryption put on it. Then scalable according to your needs. You can scale it up at any time and again scale it down according to your needs, since these are more towards the platform as a service uh, responsibility. These are not actually platform as a service. This is a particular service called as storage as a service. But when we talk about the responsibility, we are not responsible for the hardware itself, as well as the management of the software, of how things are going to be saved there or there. We just deal with the data itself. And then accessible, the storage devices and services can be accessed using REST API, HTTP, HTTPS, and can be used by different types of languages, as we showed you before, which different type of languages Azure supports. Literally anything, Node.js, Java, Ruby, Python, C, C++, C Sharp. So there are many languages that can be used with this particular service. And the next is Azure Migrate. So Azure Migrate is basically a service that helps you migrate from your on-premise environment to your Azure cloud environment. So basically, for some reason, you decide now that everyone is going on to cloud, and everyone is seeing that we are saving up more in cloud because we don't have to manage things by ourselves. We don't have to pay up for the hardware cost and things. So they decide to migrate to cloud. So this is a particular tool that will help you access your environment and again migrate that the whole thing into cloud. So Azure Migrate as a hub act as a functions as a hub to help you manage and the assessment and migration of your on-premise data center to Azure. So basically, when you deploy this service within your own data center, then it will access your environment that there are so and so services and so things working here with so and so capability. Basically, you have these virtual machines with these speculation specifications, and which are running these services having these ports and IPs open, etc., etc. So what the thing here is that it will access all that and help you migrate that to your cloud environment. Then there is unified migration platform. Basically, a single portal to start, run, and track your migration to Azure. So basically, there is this GUI based application. When you install it on your on-premise environment, it will help you to start, access, and run, and also track your migration from data center to Azure. And there are the whole ton of tools that are there, which can be helped, which can help you to migrate things from your data center to Azure. Basically, for example, say you have a particular cloud environment with Hyper-V, or say for VMware. So there is a specific tool only for Hyper-V. There's a specific tool only for VMware. Then there are also tools which use which help you with this hybrid approach. Different type of cloud providers. It will help you access that whatever things you have and help you replicate that onto Azure. And there is assessment and migration. So in the Azure Migrate Hub, you can access and migrate your premises on your on-premise infrastructure to Azure. So as I said before, that it accesses that whatever things you have on your on-premise environment, and it tells you that these things are here. And for that particular thing, it will create the same infrastructure for you within Azure. So the next service is Azure Data Box. So Azure Data Box is nothing but a physical migration service. So basically, for example, you have a lot of data on your on-premise data center, and you want that to go to Azure, but somehow or the other you don't want to use the internet to ship that data to Azure. So what you can do is you can hire a big storage device from Azure. Basically, the Azure guys will bring that to you, and once that is with you, you can securely transfer the data to that device, and then it will go to the Azure data center, and it will be uploaded to whatever thing that you have signed in that agreement. So the main thing about I think it has a storage capacity of about 80 terabytes that you can use to uh, transport at one time. So it is a rugged case. So basically, always also about the external security. There is basically a hard case that protects the data box from damaging during transit whenever it is in transporting from your private data center to Azure and from Azure to your private data center. Then there is AZ copy. Azure copy is a command line utility that you can use to copy blobs or files from your storage account. With AZ copy, you can upload files, download files, copy files between storage accounts. So basically, this is nothing but a command line utility which you can use to interchange data, copy, download, and upload things between two storage accounts. And this can even help you to synchronize your data between these two storage accounts. The also another benefit about this is that it can help you move back and forth your data between two different clouds. If you have a multi-cloud approach, if you're using a multi-cloud model, for example, some resources in AWS and some resources in Azure, then you can use AZ copy to copy resources from AWS to Azure, as well as send some resources from not resources but data from Azure to AWS. Then there is the Azure Storage Explorer. This is nothing but a standalone application, basically a GUI application which helps you manage your blobs and files in Azure. So as we explained before, blobs are nothing but binary files and text files, which comes under blobs. It can also be multimedia within your storage account. So it can help. This is basically a GUI which can help you manage all those files within your Azure storage account. You can also have this in your own PC itself. It's a GUI application which you can download from Azure. You can just go and search for Azure Storage Explorer and download that. And once you connect this to your Azure account, then whatever storage account you have and resources you have within that will be shown here within that, and you can manage that using your application. And this is interoperable between other OSs, works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And in the backend, this only uses AZ copy as the command line utility. So it is a GUI which is using AZ copy in the backend to do your management with the help of a graphical user interface. Then there is Azure File Sync. This is basically a tool that lets you centralize your file servers in Azure files and keep the flexibility, performance, and compatibility of a Windows file server. As you see, when we have Windows file server, how things are managed, and how clean it is for us to manage and track things within our file system in Windows. Similarly, this file sync can help us manage and centralize our files for that Azure file service, which we talked of before. And since this is a tool developed by Azure, which is associated with Windows, so whatever file system we have in Windows, similarly the GUI looks in Azure File Sync too. So what they're saying is it is almost like turning a Windows server into a miniature content delivery network. So a little bit about what a content delivery network is. There's also this service which comes in AZ104, but it is not talked about in AZ900. It is a very nice service to know about. So for example, you have say a website which is there hosted on Azure, and your user base is say for example somewhere in Africa, and you guys want that in such a way that whatever my website tools are there, my website resources are there, should be a copy of them should be in Africa, so that my African user base can have faster access to that. So what content delivery network does is the static files of that HTML, the static HTML files and static files such as image and video files which are there in your website, this will be a copy of that will be created in the nearest uh, the nearest data center for your user base. For example, you can decide that within Africa this particular data center is nearest to my user base, so I want a content delivery network here. So all of your static files will be replicated there. So whenever your user is accessing your website, only the dynamic part will be taken from your data center in India, whereas the static files will be taken from Africa itself. So loading the website becomes faster for your users, and hence improves your user experience. So another thing about file sync is that it will automatically stay bidirectionally synced. So whatever you do on your Windows server versus whatever you do on your Azure file service will directly be visible on your Windows server and your Azure file service itself due to this particular service called as Azure File Sync. Then there is a little bit about security, Azure identity access and security. So when I'm talking about identity and access, so in Windows it is done via Active Directory, and within Azure it is done via Active Directory. Excuse me. So what Azure Active Directory is, it is a directory service which helps us to sign in and understand the access of both cloud applications uh, and sorry, Microsoft cloud applications as well as other cloud applications that we are developing. So Azure AD can also help you maintain your on-premise Active Directory deployment. So I have an Active Directory deployment within my own data center, private data center. So I can connect that thing to my private data center. Active Directory can be connected to Azure Active Directory, which can help me with easy management of identity and access within resources when we are interchanging and exchanging data from my data center to Azure, which helps basically identity and access, if not managed properly, can lead to a security loophole, and you might have incident like getting your uh, data breached. Just like Azure Active Directory lets you use IT services without having to maintain infrastructure supporting it. So since this is just a software application, so you just need to install that within your main server or domain server, whatever you have, which helps you with this directory and identity access management. Similarly, there is Azure Active Directory domain services, which you can benefit, which you get the benefit, using which you get the benefit of domain services without the need to deploy and manage a domain controller within cloud. So for example, when you have your own private data center, so to apply policies across the whole network, you need a domain controller. So basically a domain is assigned to the domain controller, which assigns these domains to different PCs. So you can see of them as a master and slave configuration. So all the PCs connected to the domain controller are slaves, and the domain controller itself is the master. So the domain controller, is almost can do many things, can force updates, can install applications to different PCs. So you can do that, and you can also get domain services using the domain controller, obviously. So within this, using this particular service, that is Azure Active Directory domain services, you don't need to actually provision a virtual domain controller within Azure. You just use this service, and your domain services along with identity and access management can be done easily. Another thing about Active Directory is that it provides you authentication. Authentication, as in, first of all, telling that you are you. That is what authentication is. Then it can help you with a password reset, multi-factor authentication, again through different processes, such as uh, like we have it on your phone now. There is an application such as Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, which helps us with a 6 digit code, or sometimes it is our fingerprint, which helps us. It basically helps the other party understand that, okay, there are multi factors telling that this guy is actually the guy is telling that he is. So not only I provided with the password, but an additional parameter, that is what is called as multi-factor authentication. Then again, there is passwordless login, which can be done through through something called as key, hardware key. Hardware key is nothing but basically a pen drive device which has an ID written to it. Basically, ID is not the proper term. It has a private key written to it. Say for example, a 2048-bit, 2048-bit uh, RSA private key is there inside that particular hardware key, which is nothing but a USB device. So as soon as you're trying to unlock your PC, you do nothing but you connect that USB drive to your PC, and your PC reads off that key and understands that it is you or not. So another thing is, you can ban certain passwords within your directory services as your Active Directory. That, for example, there is a new worker who has joined, and he's setting his password to something as password 1234, which can easily be guessed. So all these common passwords can be banned by you, and a certain policy about passwords can be created. So your users are more on the secure part. Then there are smart lockout services. For example, uh, say for example, when you're trying to log in from your own device, and for example, your company has this particular policy, such as bring your own device, BYOD. So basically, you're allowed to bring your own laptop to your work environment and connect it to your company network and do your work. But for example, you try to connect to your company through, say for example, a different network, then your company can lock that out. For example, say for example that there is your home area, and there is a particular area that you never visit. For example, say that your company has saved that you live in India, in Mumbai or in Delhi, wherever you live. So the next time when you're trying to log in, for example, your location is being seen as coming from, say for example, Italy. So what it can do is it can lock out your device. Basically, it can lock your account until the administrator approves for that login. Since that was a very something that should trigger a warning, because your workers are not from Italy, and for example, your administrator is not allowed permission to log in from Italy. Excuse me. And there is single sign on. So basically, you need only one password to connect to different apps within Microsoft, or different apps within Azure. And you can also use different parties to connect, say different social media providers to connect to this too. So for example, there is Twitter, there is Facebook, there is Google, and there is Microsoft. So for example, you're creating an application, you can add Microsoft as an sign-in option, and your identity and access part will be handled by this Microsoft service. That's it, it is telling you that this is actually the genuine person who owns this Microsoft account. And there is application management with through application proxies, SaaS applications, and again SSO. As I explained, that you can use SSO to confirm the identity of a person. Similarly, you can add SaaS, software as a service applications, to your application. It can be part of your applications, such as there is a particular service for identity uh, and access management called as I think it was Firebase. It is a particular cloud based thing that it can allow you to connect to different services. Then there is application proxy. There is also device management. So basically device based conditional policies. So what this is that there is your particular device, and you can put custom policies on that. That, for example, this device uh, needs to have a multi-factor authentication device, a multi-factor authentication to log in. So in case your worker has not set in multi-factor authentication, then you won't be allowed even to log in. So based on also device, that only this particular device will be logged in. For example, there is this Lenovo device which can be logged in, and other device won't be logged in. So again, based on your requirement, things can be done. Then I think just a second. So I think we have already talked about zero trust yesterday, and role based access control, and we talked about conditional access now. Then external identities is nothing but private entities and entering your Azure environment. Or and also a guest access. For example, you have a private data center, and a guest is coming in to meet you for things, or there's a particular person going to visit you and you want to provide them internet access. So a guest access can be created with the minimal privileges of your network. Then the concept of zero trust was also talked about yesterday. And there is defense in depth. Basically, there are layers of defense. Uh, just to be very vague about this, defense in depth means, for example, there is a service. So for your service, there should be different layers for you to reach your service. For example, this is my data here. So before I reach this data, there are different networks and different layers of security that one has to go through. As more as the layers are, the more security you have, and there is the less chance there is to you to have a security breach. So that is layer in depth, defense in depth approach. And again, there is Microsoft Defender for cloud. So if I go on with Microsoft Defender for cloud, it may become boring for you for some reason, because when I read this was quite boring for me. So I think I'm done with storage services also, and security. And a little bit about cost management. I think we talked about this yesterday. Not yesterday. I think a day before, on the first day, the total price of ownership calculator. How basically tags. I didn't tell you about tags. So what are tags in Azure is basically when you create a service, you can assign them tags for better management. If you want to search for a particular application, then you can assign them particular tags, and you can group those applications using these tags. So Pascal, you weren't there on the, I think, the first days. We talked about total cost of ownership calculators. Basically, I had this scholarship I attended in Udacity, with Udacity. This was termed as your solution architect, is what the role was for that particular scholarship. and within that I was given a scenario to determine and access, my own private data center. So that given me that these are specifications on my private data center, and they wanted me to search that how much cost would be there for the next 5 years if I continue to be on premise, versus what will be the cost if I migrate to cloud. So I showed them that such and such thing was done by me within this scope, and these were the specifications of the services. And using that we saw that with Azure, for that particular type of services, we were saving for about I think it was $80,000 that we were saving.
Yes. I want to add just something, Raul. Um,
Sure, sure.
so this, according to this calculation, this is allow you to show you the difference between running your workload into on premises and running your workload into Azure. And you can you can see what the difference about money you're going to save if you choose to move your workload into cloud. And you can estimate it, for example, after 3 years, after 5 years, after 10 years of running your your workload into cloud and into a on premises. You will see that in the cloud it will allow you to save money, to save money and to invest money into another things. And this is it's a good way to see how you can compare your workload into on premises into your cloud in case you need to move on into your cloud. And they give you have the possibility to choose anything. And the advantage of being in the cloud computing with Azure, it's it's that with if you have a licensee from Windows services like Windows Server, like SQL database, to move on cloud, it will not be again required for you to spend again money for buying licenses. All this it will be just integrate into your price you are paying the service. And this calculation it give you the entire cost of your services if you try to move on after 5 years or maybe after a period of time. You will see that being running your service into cloud, it's very easy and it allow you to save money economically. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was the particular thing that I showed them. So they had this was their setup, basically 10 servers, something, this specification, then some web servers, some database servers, some recovery backup servers, some storage and network bandwidth. So using that we calculated that what would be the cost compared to what we will have in our data center versus what we will have on Azure. And it showed that about 800k we were saving in the coming 5 years if we use Azure. Also, this is not as accurate, but it is accurate to quite high percentage. Like things might differ over time, but if you actually use cloud for things, and if you try to use it properly, you don't underutilize things, and you are using them properly, then definitely you will be in a profit. So a little bit I just wanted to talk about last few services. I think there were Azure blueprints. So Azure blueprint is nothing but you can create as a blueprint is there when we create a house, right? So there is a whole Azure environment that you can create using a blueprint, which is nothing but there is a file format called as YAML. Using that file format, you can uh, create a particular Azure blueprint. That is basically you can just write down the configuration. There are different languages using there is a particular uh, framework called as Terraform, which can be used for this blueprint, and there is also another thing called as ARM templates. So these templates can be written by down. Basically, they are also termed as infrastructure as code. I'm taking this very fast. I just wanted to give I just wanted to give you guys a general view of what this is. So basically you write down your configuration, and once you submit that to Azure, it will create that whole environment for you. Like for example, you can write I want three virtual machines of this specification connected to this virtual network, having this web application taking from this particular GitHub repository and hosting with this domain service. You can write that whole thing down, and you can have this particular thing as your backup. So it's, something happens to your whole thing, your whole data center goes down, you can also use this particular blueprint to again bring your things up. There is a particular thing also called as ARM templates, which can be used to replicate services and create services of your particular configuration. Then there's something called as a resource locks. We can lock resources, and also modification and deletion of resources. We can lock them down and create particular policies regarding that. For example, my company has nothing to do with GPUs. For example, we don't do anything with machine learning and deep learning. So what we can do is we can create a policy that blocks all of those virtual machines which can utilize a GPU. It is called as a N family of GPU optimized uh, virtual machines. We can create a policy and block, basically deny all of those machines. So whenever we create a virtual machine and we go to the validate part, so that policy itself will not allow us to create that machine. Hence, you can stop your team for uh, even not doing that mistake by even not doing committing that mistake by mistake. So that's the main thing about it. As we saw about zero trust, that we don't trust anyone when we are talking about security. We have to take measures as much as possible. So resource lock is a very good thing we can utilize there. Then they are talking about an exercise how to configure uh, resource locks. Then I think this was 3 minutes, and we're also going out of time. So I'll leave this part to you. Service trust portal. I think it's basically about certification, regulation, and standards. Yes. So whatever you want to search about regulations and standards, you can come to this portal and search for that particular service for that particular uh, standards and regulations. So another thing was governance and compliance tools for managing and deploying. Yeah, we are done with this. The next thing is, so different tools for interacting with Azure is obviously the Azure command line interface as well as the Azure portal. Then Azure resource manager and ARM templates are nothing but whenever we create resources, it is being created by the Azure resource manager in the backend. So when I click on something create, the request goes to Azure Resource Manager and it provisions the resource for me. And similarly, the ARM template is nothing but a resource manager template. So I write down the configuration for my resource and I provide that configuration to the resource manager, and it will provision that for me. And a little bit about what Azure Arc is. Azure Ask, I think we have discussed this before, but this is nothing but a software which can help us, manage different types of workloads. Basically, mostly into hybrid and multi-cloud environments. So, hybrid environment and multi-cloud environment, as we discussed before, is having multiple cloud environments connected for one application. And hybrid approach is nothing but my private data center and uh, my public cloud uh, connected to each other and working in convenient for a particular application. So what can Azure Arc do outside of Azure? It can help us manage servers, Kubernetes clusters, Azure data services, SQL servers, and virtual machine. This is still in preview stage, but as we talked about before, Docker and containers. So when we want to manage many containers, we you do that using Kubernetes. And when you're talking about Kubernetes, there are many containers. So these containers will now work in clusters. So basically, according to my requirement, virtual machines are assigned in the backend of Kubernetes, and There are certain thing called as pods which are created. I think I'll be going too much in depth for that since this is not in the scope. But there are something called as pods that are created, which are normal, small devices within which our containers are there. So these are different clusters which are assigned and help us manage our containers. You can take that as a very basic thing, that Kubernetes is a service which you can use to manage many containers at a single command. Basically, if you just put in one command, it can create about hundreds of containers for you. That is how a strong Kubernetes is. And when you come into Azure Kubernetes service is more towards the managed part. As we were talking about shared responsibility model. So if you go to do Kubernetes on your own private data center, just to set it up and manage it, will it becomes uh, although it is very powerful, it is a very powerful tool, but when you go to manage and provision it for initials, and when you want to learn Kubernetes and doing it doing it on your own data center with actual networking, connecting cables, virtual machines, assigning resources, it becomes very hectic. But when you're doing it Azure, it is uh, you just need to few commands and a simple clicks here and there, and you'll be good to go. So I think we have also already talked about this, what things can affect cost. On the second day, Pascal talked about electricity costs can, differ in places. There are many factors, which can affect costs in Azure. So the resource type, depending on what type of resource is there, what type of type at the SQ, the tier of resource that we are using, either we are using 2 vCPUs or 4 or 8. Again, different type of SSD or HDD we are using. Then which type of availability, if we want high availability or if we don't want that. Then do we want accelerated networking or we don't want that. So there are many parameters that come into picture. Again, this is again based on what you want. So finally, I think there would only be monitoring tools left. Yeah. So the last thing is about monitoring, how we do monitoring in Azure. First of all, there is the Azure Advisor. So if we enable the Azure Advisor service, then it will give us suggestions that this particular service we think is vulnerable to security exploits. This particular service is being underutilized. This particular service is not properly provisioned, or this particular service has the SSH port opened in the for public. This is not suitable for production environment. So it gives us a different types of suggestions, which is helpful for us. And there is Azure Service Health. Basically, you can create a virtual machine of different services, and there you can create this particular, you can use this particular service called as Azure Service Health, which is it will constantly call as we use ping in our network, that say ping this particular PC to check that it is there on the network or not, is our network working or not. Similarly, it is constantly calling our service to just check that our service is on or not. And similarly, there are different checks such as how much CPU is it utilizing, how much networking is going on, different types of parameters that you can check with this. And finally, there is Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor can be applied to any service. So basically, this is a whole logging system that you can do here. There is something called as Azure Log Analytics Workspace. Within also that you can use Azure Monitor, as well as on particular single resources also, that you can use Azure Monitor. So for example, you create a virtual machine and you try to connect that to Azure Monitor. So you apply that, said this is a particular dashboard that I want to create, a GUI dashboard. I want it to connect to this virtual machine of mine, and I want to check that this particular thing, for example, my RAM utilization and say my network utilization, I want to check, and I can create certain alert policies. that whenever my CPU utilization goes over, say for example 95%, then I want it to give me an email that it is about 95%. So for example, this can also be done on budgets. For example, I have a budget of say $1,000, total budget of $1,000, and I can create a monitoring thing, a monitoring alert that whenever my budget hits to $250, then I want it to send me an email that we have hit the threshold for $250. So for example, if this is the start of the month, the first week of the month, and somehow or the other we have already spent $250, then something is there that is on in the backend and we are not utilizing it properly, and we need to go check. And this, what this helps us in is we become alerted and we go and search for that resource that is already on and underutilized. We cut that down and we save on our cost. So basically, there's the big mishap in cloud industry that you guys might have or might not have heard of. So basically, there are times when people keep virtual machines on and forget about it, and when they return the next day, they have losses in thousands and thousands of dollars. So this particular service is very helpful for that, which is an alert service which can be used within Azure Monitor. So I think that is about the gist total about AZ900. So this was the third learning module which we discussed about yesterday, and today we discussed about the second module, learning module, the learning path, and on the first day we discussed about the first learning path. So are there any questions? Hi guys, any questions? And Pascal, do you want to add something to this? Because I only gave a brief overview of things since we don't have enough time.
Okay. Things that I want just to add is according to storage. I want just to add these things that if you are running, for example, well, it's just a suggestion in case, for example, you are make a logistic into enterprises, and these enterprises they are running, for example, a file server. A file server for storing different information like documents, archives, and you can suggest them to use Azure File Sync. This Azure File Sync will help them to connect and to back up the information into Azure File Sync. And the advantage of File Sync is just allow you to share information between different sites. Like we can have a site here, you can have a site into another town, you can have a site into another town, and you want to centralize information, you can use Azure File Sync. This is only for people who are using a Windows server. It is hybrid solutions, like it combine on-premises and cloud solution. And according to blob storage, this can be useful, for example, if you are dealing with camera, you are dealing by record some video and you need more space, you can use as a blob storage. And perhaps you can have more information you need to save into cloud. You don't need to setting up other services, you can use as a blob storage. And this kind of solution is allow enterprises to be more productive and to be more productive and high availability of getting informations. And Microsoft with Azure, they're trying to improve every day the way people are interact, the way people are running solutions. And Azure 100 path, this is allow you to give you an overview of what is Azure, and it gives you the fundamentals of different services that you can find in Azure. It depends if you want to be a data analyst. It depends if you want to be someone who practices artificial intelligence. It depends of if you are a developer. It depends of someone who use cybersecurity. So at AZ900, it allow you to give you an overview and a brief knowledge of what is Azure. In case you want to perform, to continue, you can find a different path which will allow you to build your career. And I want to say for Raul, thank you again for organizing these sessions, which is give us an overview about Azure, and for inviting me to add some suggestion and some idea. So we still available for you for those who need questions, for those who need some orientations, and an easy way to get access. If you don't have a free as account, you don't need to use Sandbox, you don't have a, so into your country, your university is not registered. An easy way and to get to get every month a renewable credit, you can join just a Microsoft Learn Student Ambassadors. This will allow you to get access, to be enrolled, to get access to these services. And there you're going to be connecting with thousands of students all over the world who can help you to build your solution and to solve real world problems. Yeah, that's all, Raul.
Yeah, rather I should be thanking you because you helped me out so much, guided me about how we should manage and how to go about things in the ambassador program. Since I'm still a newbie, I don't know many things. I'm still relying on you, so keep helping me out. And thank you guys for joining. So I also put down my LinkedIn and Pascal's LinkedIn, so if you want, any of you guys want to connect to us and have any doubts in case of this. Guys, thank you for joining, and whatever doubt you guys have, you can DM us on LinkedIn, or you guys might have received my email, so my other socials are there as well. So if you have any doubts, please contact us. And if you want to register for the ambassador program, I'd recommend you please talk to Pascal. He knows a lot about this program. I'm still new in this program and he's helping me out. So if you have any doubts regarding that also, please contact him. And yeah, that's it. So thank you guys. Have a good day.
Thank you very much,
Goodbye.
everyone.